Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Symposium of Thanksgiving weekend. This is Friday, November 28th, 2025. I'm Diane Sayre, and I'm going to actually do something a little different, which is to bring my guest, Gerald Rose, on right now, because he may have some thoughts on the current breaking developments. And then we'll go to FDR's first 100 days. So, first of all, I think extremely significant and very much related to what Franklin Roosevelt wanted to do at the end of World War II is the Putin's speech in Kyrgyzstan about a new security architecture for the Eurasian landmass, although he specifies countries that are friendly to us. But this is a big deal. And he talks about the fact that NATO and the other security arrangements are quite outmoded, which of course they have been long since. He said, quote, the Russian side would like to propose holding an international expert forum on the creation of an equal and indivisible security architecture in Eurasia before the 2026 CSTO summit in Moscow. We intend to invite not only the delegations of the member states, but also representatives of friendly countries and multilateral organizations and integration associations. And then he also talked about cooperation combating international extremism, terrorism, and drug running, quote, as well as to disrupt their channels of financing. I'm sure there's alarm bells ringing all over the world on that one. Any thoughts about that so far, Jerry?
Well, I was thrilled, as you can imagine. Without being too literal about it, the initiatives that Helga LaRouche has been taking now for over 3 years with increasing density and clarity has been accepted. Lady Pandor said it on one of our conferences. Only the Schiller Institute seems to be able to bring the adults in the room. And the dialogue process that Putin has called for is a very significant escalation, because the issue for particularly the global South and the whole SCO process is to bring every nation in the world onto the stage of history. The whole idea that only a few nations can negotiate peace is an impossibility. The very fundamentals of our Constitution, and most importantly, the Declaration of Independence, is the idea of all men are created equal and endowed by their creator, which, particularly with the Pope's initiative on referencing Nicholas of Cusa, there's an increasing understanding that the universal aspect of mankind in all its manifest differentiations have a fundamental same purpose, as Jack Kennedy said so beautifully in his famous speech at American University. he was just very plain at the end. So therefore, what you see is a lifting of spirits rather than reacting to the horror of every situation. The adults in the room are beginning to pose the higher hypothesis of how do you actually and at what level can you solve the problem. And this is a great step forward for all of mankind. You see, it would
I will add that it doesn't hurt that not only is Russia winning the war, but it's now become undeniable that Russia will win this war in Ukraine. And so the U.S. position has somewhat shifted,
yes,
thankfully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the fact that we have now the cumulative effect of the adults in the room, an increasing understanding of the adults in the room, that there is a coincidence of opposites, that there is a higher hypothesis for every nation on the planet, of every religion, of every creed, of every culture, to achieve an idea of man. As Kennedy said, peace is not the absence of war. Peace makes life worth living. And that idea of peace, which is what Putin is referencing, which certainly Xi Jinping in his global governance is referencing, takes us to the level at which you can actually solve the problem. At no lower level could you, as Helga Zepp-LaRouche so brilliantly has been discussing consistently with increasing agreement in the world for the last 3 years. So I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be happier.
So just one other development, I think the Ukraine I just mentioned, which is there is a shift. They're doing everything to sabotage it by leaking conversations of Steve Witkoff and this and that. But I think that it's now dawned on at least Vice President Vance and hopefully President Trump that if they don't end the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Ukraine is going to be resoundingly defeated by Russia on the battlefield. That will look very bad for global NATO because it will mean that global NATO brought everything it had to bear short of nuclear weapons against Russia and was defeated. So it looks far better for President Trump to be able to take credit for ending a war, which after all is putting us in jeopardy of a nuclear war. And just in time for that, we have this horrific shooting in Washington, D.C. by an Afghan refugee. So the Trump administration response is first to ban all refugees, all migrants from Afghanistan. Then he says from all poor countries. Hey, the United States is a pretty poor country these days, or at least our people are pretty poor. But they don't talk about much that this guy was part of the, what do they call it, Zero Fighters. He was part of a CIA special ops group that went in and did deadly raids. Now, first of all, just participating in killing other people is really destructive. It makes you crazy. Second of all, we have no idea what went on with this guy. What if he was working with the CIA thinking he was going to liberate his country from ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then the next thing he sees is President Trump meeting with the ISIS head of Syria, the former head chopper, who's now our great ally, or who knows, or that's presuming that there wasn't something else behind this orchestrating it, trying indeed to bring about what some people want, which is such a rift in the United States that it appears to descend into something like a civil war, where you're ordering the National Guard to deploy in our cities. Now in Washington, D.C., the D.C. police are going to be deploying to protect the National Guard. I don't think that's what was intended in this. It is really stupid. And you have this operation, which I pointed out over the last days, of these 6 happen to be Democrats, 2 U.S. senators, Alyssa Slotnick and Mark Kelly, and then 4 members of the House of Representatives, calling on active duty military and intelligence professionals to disobey the chain of command if you're given unconstitutional orders. Well, that is true. That's the military code. You are supposed to disobey orders if they violate the Constitution, if they violate the Geneva Convention, etc. However, for these 6 people who are all retired, and Mark Kelly is in some trouble now because he's in the phase of retired where he can be called up if there is an emergency. So he's not allowed to violate the code, which he just did. There's talk of a court martial. But who are these people? Alyssa Slotnick is CIA. All of them served in illegal, unconstitutional military action. So first of all, it's despicable that they're asking active duty service members to do what they themselves would not do. But second of all, even more egregious is that they are the lawmakers. They are in the Congress. They are if our military is deployed in an unconstitutional fashion, the Congress is responsible for that. So don't put it on someone else. So it stinks of corruption. It stinks of insurrection or desire to just have everything go haywire. And in this context, you get this shooter killing one and critically injuring another National Guardsman. I pray that he pulls through. But this is really tragic. And of course, our society is quite violent as a whole. And that shouldn't be surprising because we're abusing our young people by sending them all over the world to kill people. So it shouldn't be surprising that we have a violent nation internally and that we have 22 soldier suicides per day, which is why this is so urgent. So what Jerry is going to be discussing is the first 100 days of President Franklin Roosevelt. And whenever I think about this, I always think about how Francis Perkins described the scene of his first inaugural after Hoover, a chicken in every pot. He wasn't willing to admit the depth of the collapse that had struck the United States, the suffering that people were experiencing, the starvation. Lyndon LaRouche, who was alive during this time, described seeing people on soup lines or just standing on street corners picking their teeth, even though they hadn't eaten anything, but they wanted to make it look like they had eaten because it was a point of pride to be productive, to be part of the social process. But in fact, they were starving. So when FDR came in and said, we are in a crisis, we have not been stricken by a flock of locusts or a natural disaster. This is of our own making. We can solve it. Everyone knows the famous, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, nameless, unreasonable, and what fear that turns advance into retreat, or whatever the exact words are. But when she looked out at the crowd and this leader came in and he said, I know what you are going through. We are in a crisis and we can solve it. She said every single person in this crowd of tens of thousands was crying. She could look out and saw the tears rolling down people's faces, tears of relief that someone finally was admitting there was a crisis and he was going to take bold action to address it. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jerry.
Thank you. It's funny that you started with that. I'm going to actually read the quote.
Oh, wonderful.
And at the end, the whole discussion will be bracketed by his inaugural. And I'll go through why, his first inaugural. The quote that you were reading was this. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. This is a direct reference to Hamlet. As you would imagine, Franklin Roosevelt was a genius. And I'm going to go through this because one of the worst travesties and the kind of sophistic attacks on Roosevelt was by Justice Black, who, by the way, was a horrific Aristotelian who was totally pro-death penalty. He was the head of the Supreme Court. And he met with Franklin Roosevelt because Roosevelt indeed was being slated, given his pedigree and his own incredible tenacity in the wake of the polio that he had. He was being slated to be the president of the United States. And Justice Black said of Franklin Roosevelt, a second-rate intellect, a first-rate person. Probably one of the most stupid comments you could ever make. And the reference, first of all, Roosevelt studied Shakespeare. And therefore, this idea of the paralysis of the will, he knew exactly what he was referencing at that point. And then in the course of the inaugural, he says, we will have action and plenty of it. And I'm paraphrasing here. But if the Congress gets in my way, I will declare emergency powers to enact what has to be enacted to defend the forgotten men and women. At that point, the crowd clapped and roared approval. Within 4 hours of his inaugural address, and we'll see what he intended. Within 4 hours of his inaugural address, he shut down every bank in the country, declared a banking holiday. He ordered them over a 3-4 day period, over a weekend, reorganized those which had no real assets, reorganized them, put them under receivership. Then he issued credit through the Federal Reserve to open all the banks, some reorganized, some not, many not. And he went on radio for the first time in history. A president went on radio and explained everything he was going to do, why he was doing it, what he hoped the effects would be. But if that were not the effects, we would come up with another way of doing this. Not only were there not runs on the bank, because there had been shutdowns of the state banks. Over $1 billion came back into the banking system the day they reopened. Now, the first 100 days, while he had experience as the governor of New York and brought in a team, Francis Perkins, as Diane referenced, Harry Hopkins, he had a whole team he brought in. He was also a nationwide figure. And it created inside the Democratic Party, which was really the party of slavery, not a very savory party, frankly. He created a reform movement, particularly with the Wisconsin Democrats, Bob La Follette, the North Dakota Democrats, who wanted national banking. There were all sorts of people who joined Roosevelt, and particularly a younger generation out of Harvard and out of the major Ivy League schools, lawyers, who came in with Roosevelt with the intention of saving the country. To understand the reality of the first 100 days, you must comprehend that all of Europe had gone either fascist or, in the case of Russia, communist, with large communist and fascist movements inside all of the European countries. Hitler, in 1933, the year that Roosevelt came in, Hitler came in to Germany. Therefore, the real issue on the table was whether democratic forms of republican forms of democracy, as was asked by Benjamin Franklin, a republic, if you can keep it, was the issue, the real issue that Franklin Roosevelt was addressing. Franklin Roosevelt single-handedly, with the invention of the first 100 days of his administration, single-handedly saved Republican form of democracy for the world. No other nation actually had Republican forms of democracy anymore. After World War I, Europe was destroyed by the Versailles Treaty, in fact. So therefore, when Franklin Roosevelt walked onto that stage of the first inaugural, and the way he ran his campaign for the forgotten men and women who spoke that day at the polls and brought him in to the presidency, was the only nation on earth who had put in a government of, for, and by the people, who had, that government had been destroyed, starting with Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, Coolidge, Hoover. They were paralyzed. And had Franklin Roosevelt not done what he did, we know, Smedley Butler said so, there was a fascist coup prepared to take power in the United States. And that fascist grouping tried to kill Franklin Roosevelt before he walked into the presidency. So that was what was at stake. But being Franklin Roosevelt, he was fearless, completely fearless. He had faced polio. He had faced almost the destruction of his health, and it never broke his will. And he was fearless. Ebullient was the word that they used about Franklin Roosevelt, because he knew what it meant to be human, to not buckle under to circumstances, as he did not do in Warm Springs, Georgia. And when he pledged on the Bible, the Bible was opened to 1 Corinthians 13 when he took his oath of office. Now, what did he do? There was never the FDIC, the Glass-Steagall reform, was one of the first things he put into motion to separate the commercial banks, which would be funded and insured, all savings, deposits, pensions, other things were secured by the FDIC, but only for commercial banks that were doing business with the public and took in savings and paychecks and other things, right? So the FDIC was put into motion. The separation of the investment banks from the commercial banks, that the commercial banks, regardless of their whether they had gold or not, since they were insured, were allowed to issue loans, fractional reserves for the economy itself. The other thing he did within hours, and this Harry Hopkins did, was they opened up a card table. It was in the middle of winter. Richie Freeman tells the story beautifully. And they were putting people back to work. They were writing government checks, working on putting people back to work, getting industry moving again, getting small businesses moving again. And people who had nothing, they were funding food banks within hours of his administration coming into office. This later became the WPA and the CCC, so that youth could begin to get actual training, both in real physical economy, some of it menial, but because they were working with the Army Corps of Engineers, many of the youth went on at night to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to actually begin to get a skill, a significant skill in engineering. And later they became, when we needed it, and we retooled and reorganized, they became the industrial engineers of the next generation, which created, through the arsenal of democracy and before then, one of the greatest economic recoveries in the history of mankind. This was all invented. This was created on the fly. It had never been done in any government anywhere in the world. For the farmers, he had a genius by the name of Wallace, Henry Wallace, whose family were farming for generations. They created parity pricing. They created the Farm Home Administration so that farmers who were getting thrown off the land, their mortgages would be picked up by the FMHA and stretched out, and the loans that were made to those farmers through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was another piece of genius. Every single one of those loans, since they were stretched out and they worked with the farmers, every single one of those mortgages got paid. Parity pricing, at least the concept. They didn't know exactly how to get it, but they had the concept of it. Then the most productive project maybe in the history of mankind, the Tennessee Valley Authority, took the most backward area of our country and created, through mining, through dams, through experimental farms, through creating industry, to recontouring the land, refurbishing the land, and with the engineers had to live in the area and work in the community to build up the communities of that area. And within a 10-year period, over 55 million people visited the Tennessee Valley Authority from around the world to see the kinds of things that can be done when the government creates the infrastructure and the education, both the soft and hard infrastructure, electricity, damming, irrigation, fertilizer. All of these farmers who signed on, they didn't have to sign on, but if they signed on to that program, they got the logistical support. They created experimental farms. Other farmers came on to see those experimental farms, to see what could be done from around the world, by the way. And it created an economic miracle in that area, all invented in the first 100 days. The banking system, the farming system, the kinds of social reforms. We didn't have unemployment insurance. We didn't have anything for the poor. They had to basically beg. Well, Franklin Roosevelt was not going to put up with that. They were Americans. They deserved dignity. They deserved respect, whoever they were. And therefore, he created a social security network to take care of those who were too sick or too old or too infirm to actually work. And we showed the humanity of what it meant to be an American citizen for all citizens. So the all invented on the fly in the first 100 days. Other experiments in terms of industry and labor working together to create fair pricing, to create a kind of minimum wage, to create the right to unionize. This was a real fight. Didn't happen overnight. Eleanor Roosevelt was key. Of course, in civil rights, the first time ever, black leaders were brought into the White House. Now, there were all sorts of the parties. The Democratic Party went ape. They were racist beyond belief. There were certain things that Franklin Roosevelt wanted to do, he couldn't do. But the reality of the situation was, in the first 100 days, I would contend the Depression ended in the first 4 hours of Roosevelt's administration, because his intention was, we will do what is necessary. And his famous, one of the most famous books written in American history was called the TVA, The March of Democracy. And it's a brilliant book by David Lilienthal, who later went on to be the head of the Atomic Energy Commission. This was invention. There was no government in the world that did anything like this. So the idea that Roosevelt was a first-rate person and a second-rate intellect? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Eloquent beyond belief, by the way. But what was crucial, and I'm going to read you more of the inaugural, because this is what was behind it all. Roosevelt's stinging indictment of the ethic of the money changers who stripped of the lure of profit by which to induce our people to follow their false leadership, have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. The time had come, Roosevelt said, to restore that temple to the ancient truths. The measure of that restoration, and this is all Roosevelt, lies in the extent to which we apply social values more noble than mere monetary profit. These dark days, this is the first inaugural. This is a country that had put through hell. These dark days will be worth all they cost us if they teach us that our true destiny is not to be ministered unto, but to minister to ourselves and our fellow men. Perhaps our nation will be more united, more equitable, more prosperous too, if we abandon the current program of cutting taxes for the rich and the social programs. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. And that was not just rhetoric. That is actually, if you want to understand the genius of Franklin Roosevelt, it came from his intention, which he articulates here, to chase the money changers out of the temple. And it's very reminiscent of Lincoln's second inaugural, when he said, if we have to pay for our iniquity with this horrible civil war, then we will pay, because the judgment of God is righteous and good. And Roosevelt says, maybe, not maybe, we if we get rid of this, the money changers, if we return to the ancient truths, which founded this nation against the British Empire. And we will invent what we need to invent. LaRouche's 4 laws, 3 of them. 1, the Glass-Steagall reform. 2, the creation of credit. Now, Roosevelt used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, but Paul Gallagher is right. It's much better to have a permanent institution that is chartered to issue infinite credit for productive purposes. Now, you obviously have to judge the projects and judge the reliability of the people who are doing the projects. You don't just give out money. That's why you need local banking. The local bankers know the people, can judge who they are. We have to put 1 million more young farmers back onto the land using parity pricing, using a Federal Reserve charter to do this, because you do not want, because you had Roosevelt, the RFC was genius, issued the credit, not just for American projects. The RFC issued the bonds, which the Treasury bought, to build the largest steel mill in the world in Brazil. They issued the credits in the Middle East for projects during the Roosevelt administration. The third area of the 4 laws is to stabilize the world monetary system, which Roosevelt intended through the Bretton Woods system. There were principles involved. The dollar is a very problematical reserve currency at this point. Through treaty arrangements, we could probably arrange something. That's the third. All of that was done under Roosevelt and saved Republican form of democracy for the world. And the idiots, the disgusting sophist idiots, who say, oh, Roosevelt was a socialist. You're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, Roosevelt, got us into debt. Are you mad? He issued credit. That's not debt. He got us out of debt. These are the kinds of genius that saved this republic. Other geniuses like Henry Wallace, other geniuses like Harry Hopkins were inspired by the absolute, ebullient, happy warrior that Franklin Roosevelt represented. And the Wall Street who hated him came on their knees to Franklin Roosevelt and begged him to save them when their Hitler project turned on Mother England. And they came on their knees to Franklin Roosevelt. That's another story for another time. But that's how republics are made. That's what we represent at our best. We could do, it's hard to do better than that, but we could do it. We could do it. And we have to do it. We have to invent. We have to get rid of so much, but we have to invent more. And that's what we represent as a republic, and that's what we represent. America was never a place. It was always an ideal for all republics at all time. And frankly, Russia and China happen to be more American than we are now.
Thanks, Jerry. That's a very polemical point, and I think true, because what FDR, and particularly this Hamiltonian influence, really embodied was the government defending the principle of the general welfare. And that's very hard for Americans to imagine right now. Now,
the reason I say China, if you look at the global governance, the 4 points of the global governance by the Chinese government, the last point is government must be for the people. The purpose of government is the progress of people. I mean, you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, what she said. I tried to do some things, try to defend some people. Now I'm an enemy. So I'm not going to take this abuse. They're both one party. Now we are in a situation where not just the world, a lot of Americans are very looking for something. They're really looking for something, and we have to provide that. We have some ideas which we'll reveal in early January.
yes. Now, I have a question for you,
Sure.
which is we have right now this real insane crackdown on immigrants, and it's done in this very hateful way. We want to make people suffer. There's a kind of a meanness to it and a delight in being cruel, which I'm quite uncomfortable with. I think it's a very dangerous pathway. Also, as you may know, I think I've mentioned it to you, that they're really reviving the death penalty. South Carolina had not executed anyone for a number of years because the lethal injection or whatever didn't supply, maybe I would say they might have been a little more civilized for a few years. Now they are killing people by firing squad. I think they've executed 14 people this year. I might be wrong. Someone can look it up. But it's the same mentality. And I just wonder your thoughts on this, and what do you think would have been the approach of Franklin Roosevelt? Suppose he came in and was handed this mess in the United States. How would he have handled this?
Same way he handled it in the first time. Yeah, look, I'm just going to be blunt here. People may get pissed off, but I'm just going to be blunt. You pick on some poor immigrant and you don't say the fact that Wall Street is killing people all over the country. They are. We talked about this in the last discussion you had with Paul, the affordability question.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can afford a house. The food bills have increased by 30% minimum. You've been lied to about all this. People are desperate. God knows how many people commit suicide, really. So you want to do something, you concentrate on infrastructure, you concentrate on initially the Glass-Steagall. Without drying out the bubble, there's not a damn thing you can do. If you pay $1 trillion for your military and you pay $1 trillion in debt, there's not a damn thing you can do. And it's all BS. Private industry is going to take care of it. Come on, they're going to build dams. They're going to build energy systems. Forget it.
Well, they might build a power plant so they can spy on you better and have a data center.
Well, fine, but that's government anyway. That's the government.
That's true. The government is paying them to do this.
Yeah.
No, right? And we get to pay for the extra energy.
Yeah, well, it's Paul.
Yeah.
No. You have to pick and choose how you're going to move the whole process forward for all of our citizens. And getting rid of immigrants is not going to do it. Yes, we should have secure borders. Yes, Of course you have these rights and you should do them, but why huff and puff that that's your plan, right? If
Well,
you
how much better has it? We've supposedly deported tens of thousands of people. Is everyone feeling better now? Did the cost of your mortgage go down? The cost of your
That's right.
car?
It's a cheap shot. It's a cheap
Right.
political shot. It's hot button issues. Now, to Trump's credit, he's got the. It seems, and Helga was very. I wouldn't say very, but she was optimistic that this Russian thing could work for the reasons we've discussed. So you got to give credit where credit is due. But unless you take on the first order of business is Franklin Roosevelt shut down every bank and imposed Glass-Steagall as soon as he could. That's what you got to do. You want to do something good for all people, for all Americans, do that. And then issue the credit the way that Paul was discussing it. Because you don't want the vagaries of a good president. You don't know what you're going to get, right? You really do want an institution like the Third Bank of the United States to have a mandate to continue this process no matter who the president is. And you don't want a president who could issue bonds for anything they want. You really don't. Right? So you choose crucial areas, what LaRouche called the 4 laws. Unless you secure that, there's nothing you're going to do for this country. There's nothing you're going to do. You can huff and puff. Oh man, I mean, our former members.
I think there's a little too much of that.
Yes, well, it's all a show. Unless you concentrate on Glass-Steagall, credit, stabilizing the world monetary system to carry on trade, and go for real physical economy in terms of the, as Lynn says, the crash fusion program with the rest of the world, you're not going to do anything good. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that the green agenda is out. That's great. But that doesn't create anything. That just doesn't have it getting looted by the British again. So I think he would do exactly what he did. And he would declare, we are in an emergency. We have the worst bubble in human history, which is about to have a reverse leverage blowout. That's what he'd say. And we say we'd have nothing to fear so much as fear itself. We can create a new monetary system overnight. We never needed Wall Street. Now, Roosevelt got around that with the RFC. Mm-hmm. He just did it.
But I think now so many people hate the Federal Reserve. Now everyone doesn't agree we should nationalize it. Some fun Hayekian silly people think that, oh, everyone's just so good, we don't really need a government. Yeah. But sure. We need a national bank. And what everyone agrees on, I think everyone agrees, is we don't want private billionaires meeting secretly to line their pockets while the nation suffers. I think that people are clear on that. And I think we have to have an idea of the good. And I think, FDR, he really generated growth. There's an old video, which is available in the public domain. I think it's on the WPA. It shows what they were doing in New York all at the same time. I couldn't believe it when I saw this thing. I mean, they were building rec centers, schools, teaching music, building, modern transport systems and hospitals. And they were doing more in a short amount of time simultaneously than may have been built in the entirety of New York State in the last 50 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Arthur Schlesinger was not a bad guy. He really isn't. Uh-huh. And did a credible work. on the first 100 days, but you can't understand it as statistics.
Right.
Because if you attempt to understand economics as statistics, how many unemployed, forget it.
Right.
I mean, of course, they completely revolutionized the country, but that's not what happened. What happened from the second he walked in is that people's confidence that we could invent what we needed to invent, which of course we proved in World War II. It was a complete upshift in confidence and energy to solve the problems. That's what we did.
Yep. Yes. Well, we need to do it again. And as you said, China, Russia, Iran, frankly, Brazil, they have some really excellent leaders, statesmen that the United States could work with if we wish to become an honest broker. And I do agree. I think that President Trump and company are now finally trying to seriously end the Ukraine-Russia war. That would be great. President Trump is going to meet with Xi Jinping in China in April. What happens if the whole system blows out before that? This is why we need, and I will say the LaRouche organization has set up a page for our Glass-Steagall mobilization. There will be instructions there, details, sample resolutions. We need everybody organizing for this. I would encourage you, we still have Saturday and Sunday of this Thanksgiving weekend to do some research. Read some of Franklin Roosevelt's speeches. Read some of Abraham Lincoln's speeches. Read George Washington's farewell address. We are entering very shortly the 250th year of the Declaration of Independence, and we should be dedicating ourselves to restoring our republic to the intent of our founders and to the intent of those people like Nicholas of Cusa, Joan of Arc, Confucius, Socrates, who made contributions to the progress of mankind, which our nation took to create this experiment, this constitutional democratic republic. And we should absolutely not lose it. People have worked too hard for it, but we have to work on reviving this and perfecting our union, as it was said. Do you have any closing comments, Jerry, before we sign off here?
I was reminded of this wonderful speech that Franklin Roosevelt did. And it was the name of a book written about him by his son, Rendezvous with Destiny. Every generation in a republic has a rendezvous with destiny. Or as Benjamin Franklin said, I gave you a republic. You have to keep it. This is our moment. This is our time. And because of the work of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, the world is now, as we discussed from the beginning, moving to a level of understanding of what it means to be human, by which we can solve, as Franklin Roosevelt did in his time, solve the problems that need to be solved.
Yes. Good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I believe, well, I'm doing 2 special interviews next week, so I'm not going to say what next Friday will be, but you don't want to miss it.
Okay, great.
See you then.